Democrats on Capitol Hill ramping up some pressure for a war powers vote to limit any further action in the Middle East, while Republicans say this is the wrong moment to limit the power of our commander-in-chief while our troops and our allies face real threats. Joining us to discuss is John Lauro, former lawyer to President Trump. Good morning to you, John. Very quickly, legally speaking, talk about the president's power as commander-in-chief to order strikes like this without a prior vote in Congress.
Under the Constitution, the president has the absolute power to act in the best interest of the country, particularly in the event of a national emergency. Here you have Iran with nuclear weapons, a terrorist threat to the United States. He certainly acted within his constitutional powers. There's also a statute that requires notification to Congress, which the president complied with as well. So the president is acting within the law. All of this is political theater by the Democrats. They're not going to get any limitation on President Trump's ability to carry out this activity right now.
In simple terms, what would a war powers vote, if it was agreed upon, what would that resolution actually do, and how much real legal force would it have, if it did pass?
Well, conceivably, it could cut off funding for American troops in a theater of war right now, which is just outrageous. And no, the Democrats aren't going to vote for that either. And by the way, it would take 5 Republicans to leave President Trump's support and vote for it, which is not going to happen either. So it's really just grandstanding by the Democrats, and nothing's going to happen on Capitol Hill.
And some other legal news that we're following. We know former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were deposed last week by a House subcommittee in the Epstein probe. What's the goal with this, and what do you know about the House investigation into Epstein and his ties to perhaps other federal government officials?
Well, this is a hot item issue. Obviously, Congress is interested in it, and there's going to be public hearings and public disclosures. One thing about Bill Clinton, he was called Slick Willie for good reason. He's very, very good at answering tough questions. But the biggest takeaway of his testimony is President Trump had nothing to do with Epstein, which really undermines the entire Democratic defamatory assault on President Trump with respect to Epstein. And Clinton turns out to be one of Trump's biggest supporters. He had nothing to do with it.
What are some other names of other former officials that we can maybe expect to hear in the coming weeks and months, perhaps?
It's not clear. A lot of this is, in effect, under seal right now. Much of it was grand jury testimony, so we'll just have to wait and see. But clearly, people are interested for a number of reasons. One, it involves child abuse. Second, it involves abuse of power. And finally, it involves a sense of the American people that there's 2 standards of justice, one for the very wealthy and one for the rest of us. So I think this is going to stay with us for a while. But the good news for the White House is you have a leading Democrat but saying President Trump had nothing to do with any of this.
I want to ask you also about this new report that reveals the Biden White House waived executive privilege and allegedly colluded with Georgia prosecutor Fani Willis in order to get testimony from Trump-era officials to be used in that case against him. What were your thoughts when you heard about this? A current president asked to waive a predecessor's privilege?
Not surprised at all. I represented President Trump in the Washington, D.C. case. I knew there was collusion going around the country. This was all orchestrated by the Biden administration to weaponize the criminal justice system to go after a political candidate, President Trump, in fact, go after a political movement. Everything they did was to try to disrupt his campaign. I'd like to see the outrage of the Democrats in terms of using the criminal justice system in this way. What Fannie Davis did in Georgia was an absolute disgrace, and she got I guess set on her own fanny with that case, right? I mean, the whole thing got dismissed.
All right, former lawyer to President Trump, John Lauro, always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a great week.
You too.
Some Democrats on Capitol Hill are trying to limit the president's authority and force a vote on the war powers resolution. Other lawmakers argue now is not the time to handcuff our military, shut off our defense systems, and jeopardize national security. Joining us now to discuss is Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. Good morning to you, Senator. You are one of those senators against this war powers vote. Democratic Senator John Fetterman, already a hard no. How many GOP senators would actually even vote for this? I mean, is this DOA?
Jan, I never speak for another senator. What I can tell you is this. As I have talked to Tennesseans this weekend, they are grateful that President Trump took action. They are grateful that the Ayatollah is gone and that this reign of terror has ended. They are very hopeful for the Iranian people that they are going to grab this opportunity to establish a democratic form of government. And the Iranian Americans that live in Tennessee that I've talked with have been sharing video that they have gotten out of Iran or that they're getting from other countries that show the celebration and the support for the Ayatollah being taken out.
We also know there's going to be probably some GOP Congress members who could vote for this. So everyone will have a chance, every lawmaker will have a chance to put it on the record this week, it looks like. But we're also operating without full DHS funding. How serious is it to be in a partial shutdown of Homeland Security right now? And what do you say to Democrats who are holding up this funding bill?
You know, I tell them they've picked the wrong fight here. And when you look at DHS funding, 35% of it is FEMA. And of course, whether it is Tennessee or the East Coast, FEMA is hard at work helping people recover from storms. And we also know TSA and the protection of our nation, the Secret Service, this is all funded through DHS. Now, the reason they picked the wrong fight is ICE funding was taken care of in the big, beautiful bill during the summer. They are funded through 2029. So the Democrats, some of the Democrats may not like ICE. They may not like what they're doing, but you're not going to address it by attacking the funding for the Coast Guard, for TSA, for FEMA, and for other DHS operations.
Right, and you're putting security at risk as a result. And speaking of which, you have introduced the Migrant Crime Reporting Act, which would require states to publicly track crimes committed by illegal aliens. Why is that transparency so important, and how would your bill give states the tools to report this data?
Yes, I was reading a report that the Tennessee District Attorneys Association had done, which was chronicling the crime committed in Tennessee by those illegally in the country, and really dug deep on this. There were murders, robberies, car thefts, things of that nature. And pardon me, I thought it is appropriate that we look more holistically at this, state by state. What is happening in states that have sanctuary policies? What is happening in states without sanctuary policies? And by having the states utilize the template that they did in Tennessee, then the citizens will know what portion of crime, and indeed when you see escalation rates in crimes, such as DUIs, injuries or death by DUIs, and you see these escalation rates, you can more closely monitor what is happening from individuals illegally in the country who are working outside of the rule of law and our requirements, and what is happening with crime in our communities by citizens in those communities.
I also want to ask you about a recent op-ed that you wrote saying that if big tech will not protect children, Congress has to step in. Of course, this all comes as Mark Zuckerberg testifying in the landmark social media addiction trial in California. Tell us more about the Kids Online Safety Act, because I know this is a huge passion of yours, and also what this act would do. What would it effectively do?
The Kids Online Safety Act would establish product safety guidelines for the virtual space. Jan, when you look at every industrial sector in this country, they all have product safety guidelines, whether you're buying a car, a mattress, a coffee pot, a toaster, anything. And the only area in our industrial sectors without safety, product safety, is the virtual space. This would establish that standard. What we have to do is make certain that we are protecting our children in the virtual space. And right now, there are not any guidelines. You cannot delink from these algorithms. You cannot have an opening of that black box. You are not able to report when there are adverse actions in the virtual space. And that is the crux of what is happening in this social media trial in California.
So would the liability fall then on the actual platforms themselves, or where does parental responsibility also come into play in this?
Yes. Well, just like with every other component, there's always going to be parental responsibility. But what we have not had is the toolbox and the guidelines. You know, we say a child cannot get behind the wheel of a car and get that driver's license until they're 16. Of course, parents are involved in that. But right now, there is no place for parents to report bad actors and to have those bad actors held to account. There is nothing that says social media, you share in this responsibility to monitor your product, which are these platforms, and to make certain that bad actors are removed from these platforms. So the Kids Online Safety Act would put those protections in place to make certain that in the virtual space, our children have that baseline of protection.
All right, look forward to following that and also the votes on that. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn, we appreciate you joining us this morning. Have a great week.
Good to join you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meantime, Congress is preparing for a high-stakes showdown this week over President Trump's military actions in Iran. Both the House and Senate scheduled to vote on the war powers resolutions seeking to stop further military action without congressional approval. The National News Desk, Jeff Harris, joins us. And Jeff, since the strikes were launched, these resolutions have been a major focus. Tell us more about this specific law and what lawmakers are now saying.
So the War Powers Resolution is a federal law designed to check the president's power to deploy forces to an armed conflict without getting congressional approval. Those backing the law say the administration gave no evidence of an imminent nuclear or missile threat justifying Trump's actions, a claim that's being refuted by those against it. Both the House and Senate now bracing for a showdown this week over President Trump's authority as commander-in-chief. Lawmakers expected to vote on war powers resolutions intended to halt further military action against Iran without congressional approval.
And Donald Trump chose intentionally not to come before Congress, which is why we're going to force this vote on a war powers resolution and make sure that we do everything we can to constrain him at this point in time.
I think the president is acting to keep America safe and to make America safer. Iran, for 47 years, has been the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling the press Monday the administration was in compliance with the law, briefing congressional leaders known as the Gang of Eight before the operation, adding the strikes were a proactive defense measure to address an imminent threat.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded.
Meanwhile, Monday morning, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth also pointing to an imminent threat from Iran, specifically a conventional shield for their nuclear projects.
Iran was building powerful missiles and drones to create a conventional shield for their nuclear blackmail ambitions.
But some Democratic members of the gang who were briefed by Rubio Monday are criticizing the short notice that was given and lack of prior congressional approval.
I've said before, I've said now, there was no imminent threat to the United States of America by the Iranians.
Now, while most Republicans support President Trump, Senator Rand Paul and Thomas Massie are pushing for the resolution. Massie writing on X, quote, "I am opposed to this war. This is not America first." Meanwhile, Democratic lawmakers, most notably John Fetterman, have voiced support for the military operations, dismissing the war powers vote as a, quote, empty gesture.
This was an incredibly precise and successful strikes, and they eliminated most of the leadership. So here we are. So yes, I do support that.
Take a look here. Our researcher finding multiple previous presidents, including Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, have all taken military action without prior congressional approval, although later Reagan did seek authorization. Coming up on Tuesday, the Trump administration will hold briefings with both the House and the Senate, with top officials like Rubio, Hegseth, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe all expected to be in attendance. Reporting for the National News Desk, I'm Jeff Harris.